project, especially with youth, young adults in France and Germany with migration backgrounds, second, third generation. And well, it's difficult for me in the first glimpse to say what is urban riots in France, which we know since about 30 years. The first time in the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s in the Lyon region, then the second, let's say, wave in the beginning of the 90s in the Ile-de-France, and then with a kind of acceleration since the end of the 90s until 2005. It's difficult to say it's the fourth case against autorité publique, but maybe it's more or less this kind of type. I haven't an answer immediately, but I will try to figure out some causes, context factors for these kind of urban riots, which we don't know in Germany. Even though in Germany we have a problem of integration of ethnic minorities. You mentioned the Turks, one of the most important group with migration background in Germany. Well, in Germany we don't have these kind of troubles we see in France, and therefore a comparative look can figure out some causes maybe you don't find when you look only on France. It's difficult, I think, to predict these kinds of violences, which is one of the questions the organizers posed. However, you can know something about the context factors like social exclusion, like geographical segregation within the cities and others. And we know the typical incidences when such kind of spontaneous violences break out. Typically there are harsh confrontations between the police or persons of the social order with youth, male youth normally, with often migration background. It's like this in the United States, where we know these kind of violences first in Great Britain and in France. Well, I will figure out 5 causes, 5 reasons for these kind of urban turmoils. Two are among the main factors, which is social exclusion as a first reason in terms of geographical segregation and social marginalization. And the second is institutional pressure, mirrored especially in France by a politic of law and order. Well, and 3 others I will speak later on the social exclusion in terms of geographical segregation, social marginalization. There you can see in France, even though there's a relatively developed neighborhood policy during the 90s, the indicators, which I cannot show within this time frame, show that there's an aggravation of exclusion in terms of segregation and marginalization. First of all, there's a huge portion of young adults and youth living in the peripheral estates, housing estates of France, and they, in whole Europe, are hit and affected the most by the trends of flexibilization of the labor market and urbanization. And especially among these youth, those with immigration background from non-European states. Of course, these trends of precarity, of unemployment do not hit only the people with immigration background, but those with low education and formal worker status, but among them migrants the most. This trend we can see also in Germany, that there's an aggravation since the 90s. However, we have a different, especially different urban context in Germany, which is also different in East and West. In the eastern part we have a lot of high-rise estates, more than in France, but they are not as socially marginalized. Since the wall came down that you can see a deterioration of the social milieu within these estates, but a much more lower portion of immigrants from Eastern European countries. In the western part of Germany, you have more typically the disadvantaged quarters within the city, which makes it different to the situation in France. The second point is which I would like to call institutional pressure. There's an inquiry from Fabien Joubert, a researcher in France, who shows that since the end of the 90s, there are more and more court procedures against youth with migration background, especially of Maghreb and Black African background, and it's especially since 2002 with Sarkozy as Minister of the Interior that the policy of law and order was more and more enacted, as you might know, and where the presence of the police, regular controls of the identity, safekeeping, and so on, and even against small delicts like harboring are more and more punished. And it's not by chance, for example, that in 2007 in the Gare du Nord there was a kind of urban tumult after control of tickets of the black immigrant descendant. And also interviews with youth in the French quarters show that this relationship between police and youth, which is a kind of mouse and cat game, is really at the center of the perception of these violences. But if you speak about institutional pressure, you don't have to mention only the policy and politics of order and security, also other political fields like the social and migration policy has to be mentioned. Since one trend in European countries is that the social policy is demanding more and more from people in welfare to integrate themselves actively in a more and more flexible and precarious labor market, especially for the youth. So there are more demands to be active. Second, the migration policy and politics is getting restrictive, kind of global trend in fact, but you have to imagine that especially the relationship of the already arrived within the countries to their friends and relatives in the home countries are affected. And if you look at the urban rights 2005 in France, it was the first time that a huge portion of immigrant descendants from Black Africa participated, and they are among the recent immigrants in France, which shows that the immigration policies are immediately perceived by these communities. These are the first two reasons, causes, context factors, but there are three others, especially if you compare this to Germany. To speak about the law and order policy